Hi everyone, welcome to Stories in the Flesh, Higher Education Women and Their Tattoos. My name is Dr. Christina Romero-Ivanova. My colleagues are Professor Brooke Komar and Professor Martha Warner, and we are from Indiana University, Kokomo. We hope that you enjoy this presentation of ours. I want you to just kind of dwell for a moment on these tattoos. Each one of them is different. Each one of them has different symbols. Some of them have a lot of color. Some of them are nothing but color. Some of them have bits of color around in different spaces. And all of them each represent different pieces of lives, women's lives. In this presentation, we're going to be talking about the restoring of 3 of the participants' tattoos and the storytelling that goes along with them. We hope to provide insight into how tattoos can be entry points into women's storytelling, and of course, importantly, the habitus or the behaviors of their lives. What their lives are like daily, a sense of identities, all of those things speak to habitus. And also we hope to provide information on narrative analysis going forward. In this study, there are 8 of us in higher education. 7 of us are professors and 1 of us is a graduate student. The 3 who are presenting today, as you're listening to this presentation and watching it, are professors. Upon our bodies, situated in different spaces of our bodies, we each have tattoos. In this writing that the presentation is about, there are 8 different tattoos, 1 on each of our bodies. We come from different disciplines, from the field of education, psychology, English, theology, radiologic technology. And we also come from 2 different institutions, Indiana University, Kokomo, which is the 3 of us who are presenting are from, and others, and then 1 who is a graduate student at the Indianapolis Theological Seminary. So as you gaze upon the different tattoos now, you know whose tattoo is paired with which one. So mine, Christina, upper left corner with the birds and the dandelion and the seedlings flowing upward. Patricia's is right underneath, then Christina Downey's, and then over towards the center, Julianne's, and then Brooke's, and you'll hear about hers a little bit later. Down from hers is Michelle's, back over to the right and up, Martha, and you will hear from Martha about her tattoo in a little while as well. And then the last one farther to the right of Michelle is Eva. Each one is different. Really, the conceptual framework, and namely so, is not necessarily a theoretical framework. It's more conceptual because we draw from different areas when writing about our tattoos. Artifactual literacies is very, very important because we draw upon tattoos as transportable artifacts of the skin, artifacts of the flesh, according to Paul and Rossell, 2010. Women's ways of knowing is something that is very important as well for our writing and for this presentation, because we are looking at silencing and the ways in which we have been silenced and the ways in which our tattoos really have allowed us to speak beyond the margins of silencing, using the tattoos as entry points and revealing aspects of our lives and identities. And then the last one is sacred literacies, which is a theory that I continue to build upon, that I came up with, that has emerged from a lot of my own research and work. So thinking about the literature and historically how tattoos have been perceived, originally they were not favorable. Now they are socially acceptable, and we draw from Fisher, 2002, Horn, Zusman, and Zusman, 2007. We also think about individuals and how they tattooed, why they tattoo, especially why they tattoo, for spiritual reasons, for resistance, cultural identification, identity, Fisher and many others have talked about the reasoning for tattoos, especially modern tattooing. And then individuals tattoo their bodies, we know, as ways to narrate their lives, drawing upon Fisher, 2002, and Wilrup, 2007. The design of this study and the writing of our article is a critical narrative design because we are looking at intersectionality through a feminist lens, really, thinking about the individual stories that emerged from looking at our tattoos, from remembering. Methods include individual stories that we each have looked at our tattoos and written, and those have been shared through a Google Doc. That's how we wrote our article and also for this presentation. And we used first layer of in vivo coding, which really means that we were looking at our own storytelling and things that we said within our stories and using codes to pull out and put into categories. And then the second layer of coding, which we are continuing to do, is narrative and plot coding, thinking about the grander story, right, of the situation and the tattoo, and then smaller stories within the grander story, and thinking about what kinds of things accordingly with plot as far as the start of the smaller story, rising action, climax, falling action, just as you would thinking about stories that you read and analyze. And then overall, we are going to be doing cross-case analysis with comparing our different stories and tattoos, and then overall intersectional analysis and narrative analysis, thinking about who are the main speakers in the stories, the main actors in the stories, and then intersectionally looking at our different identities and how they intersect within the tattoos. So research questions, which we know are important for any study and really writing academically. And our research questions center on what our tattoos do, right? And how we can imagine them. So the questions are asking, how could women in higher education from different disciplines address and transcend the aesthetic presence of their tattoos to gaze beyond the visual margins of their tattoos into the deeper symbolic meanings of stories embedded in their tattoos? Which is a mouthful, I know, but really we're thinking about our tattoos and going beyond just the margins of aesthetic purpose, beyond the colors, beyond the symbolism, to what do those symbols in the tattoos mean and what are the stories behind them. Now come the storytellings, and you're going to hear from me first in my tattoo, next Brooke, and then last Martha. And at the end, we will kind of take a look at the end of each storytelling, briefly, we will kind of look at some analysis, some initial analysis that we've done, and then moving forward into what's happening next with our study. Christina's story, Wishberries to Blackbirds, Trauma to Freedom. If you look at the tattoo here, as I've captured it in this photograph, this digital artifact, there is something my daughters and I like to call the wishberry, and the seedlings that are fluttering up, up, up. And I imagined it as transforming into blackbirds. There are different colors. There's the teal. There's the purple, different colors of hues with the seedlings and the blackbirds from the dandelion. The story. It edges closer, and I am frozen. Eyelids squeezed. Anxiety envelops my small body. Its heartbeat becomes louder as bile moves up from my stomach to my throat. I swallow through clenched teeth as the blood from my tongue mixes, sour. Trying to force volume from my lips, I whisper, scream, but nothing comes out. It's large, Rough tendrils extend to the only safe space that is my side of the bed and wrap tightly around my thighs. I am physically silenced. So I just give you a snippet, really a snapshot, or should I say an excerpt from the poem that I have now, which is currently in press with American Psychological Association, Family Systems and Health Journal. And I gave you that snapshot or that excerpt because that really describes, I guess, the purpose of my tattoo. The poem itself is a childhood flashback of my experience having been sexually assaulted, so it was traumatic. I was a child. The connective practice of the poem, and if you think about the poem as well as the wearing of my tattoo, is a narrative literacy practice, which contains really habitus or information about my habitus, my upbringing just a bit, thinking about, what kind of situation would allow a child to be assaulted in such a way. So it's really speaking to habitus as well. So this is kind of a bit of first and second round coding. I have on the left here symbolic representations column, and on the right, the restoring the tattoo through analysis. So on the left, we have the colors of my tattoo, which are teal and purple hues. Teal represents rape, sexual assault survival. Purple, domestic violence survival. And then, of course, there are the seedlings that transform into blackbirds. So for the teal and purple hues, there's that kind of permanence and silencing stains of trauma. The seedlings in that transformational process of former identities of having been a rape and sexual assault and domestic violence victim being transformed into a survivor, no longer in victim mode, but in survivor mode.
Hi, my name is Brooke Komar. I've been a visiting lecturer at IUK for 6 years, and I'm here to share my story about a tattoo, which I've entitled Freedom. My mother and adoptive stepfather, who came into my life when I was 3 and adopted me when I was 12, raised 3 children together, of whom I am the oldest. Their perspectives on life through the lens of conservative evangelical faith beliefs greatly influenced how I perceived myself, others, and the world. So when I developed romantic and sexual attraction towards both female and male classmates in 4th grade, I silenced my sexual identity, which ran counter to the internalized messages of what was right and wrong. I was acutely aware that any hint of desire outside of heterosexual norms would result in judgment, criticism, and rejection from family and faith communities, and even from God himself. According to Prochaska and De Clemente, who proposed an integrative theory and model of an individual's readiness to act, I would remain in the pre-contemplation stage of change with regards to both my sexuality and my desire to get a tattoo for most of my life. In this stage, an individual is largely unaware of the need for change, and they lack the support to enact change. In adolescence and through my young adulthood, I attended college and graduate school and began to consider ideas, beliefs, and perspectives that were unlike that of my family of origin. As my intellect expanded, so did my understanding of diversity and intersecting identities, and I became quite open-minded, yet I still lacked many supports that would aid in facilitating the necessary change to accept and love myself as a bisexual Christian. I continued to remain in conservative evangelical faith communities, though I was transitioning to contemplation and preparation stages of change, as I was aware that I wanted to live an authentic and genuine life, and did for the most part. But I continued to remain silent in the area of sexual development, given the cost that might be associated with my coming out. In the 3 years leading to my 40th birthday, I had begun to process and evaluate that element of my identity that I had long denied and rejected. I had feared exploring it at the risk of losing my family and my faith. But by my 40th birthday, I was no longer experiencing an internal crisis. I'd fully accepted myself. I was at peace, knowing that God had created my inmost being and knit me together in my mother's womb. And as a result, I was accepted by Him and created by Him. I began to experience the freedom that comes with full acceptance of oneself. In that same year, I also experienced what all of us did, and that is a global pandemic. During that time, I contracted the disease and had a very near-death experience with coronavirus, which caused a shift within myself. I stopped caring about disappointing the people in my life or living life to avoid other people's judgment and condemnation. Perhaps it was the brush with death and my reflections on what's most important, or perhaps it was turning 40 and developing a confidence that grows with age. I also think that it was a result of being true to myself and experiencing the peace that comes with identity congruence. So when I was 40, I decided to get a tattoo. I chose to get my tattoo at the Bohemian Tattoo Club and Art Gallery. The design, as you could see in the first slide, is of a cross, a well-recognized Christian symbol, along with birds in flight and several colors, an ombre of blue, purple, and pink, which is quite familiar to those in the LGBTQ+ community. I had taken action. I was beyond the stage of contemplation and preparation and was ready to make a change in my life. And I did act as I had deconstructed and reconstructed my faith identity to include all parts of myself. So in my tattoo, there are several symbols present that I'd like to share with you. First is the placement of my tattoo. I intentionally put the tattoo on my right wrist, which is extended when I introduce myself to others. I wanted to be able to share with others the fullness of my identity as a Christian bisexual woman who was unafraid to live life. The second symbol is the Christian cross, which is very familiar and well-recognized Christian symbol. Third, we have the coloring of the tattoo. From the bottom, you can see teal and blue, and it transitions into a deep purple, and then again transitions as the bird flies up into a light purple and pink. This coloring is very significant because they're familiar to those in the LGBTQ+ community, particularly for people who identify as bisexual. The birds themselves are flying in an upward pattern and encircling the cross. And this was significant to me to just demonstrate the freedom and the lightweightness of, that lightness, that weightlessness, and freedom that comes with being fully true to oneself. Tattoos are accepted by many as a visual symbol or metaphor, applied to a living, breathing canvas. As a board-certified art therapist trained in fine arts, art history, and theories of psychology, I'm quite familiar with the profound life-affirming transformations that can result when people are given a safe place to externalize their internal images that express deep life narratives. In creating and viewing these externalized symbols, we're able to better understand ourselves and the nature of our troubles and our celebrations, and in turn develop positive, enduring changes and sense of self. With my own tattoo, as I'm asked about it, I'm able to share with others the identities that I embody as a woman, as a Christian, as a mother, and a person who is of bisexual identity. I'm able to share freedom in my faith and discuss those intersectional identities and make connections with others who might be occupying spaces of vulnerability. My tattoo has really allowed me to transform the shame and silence that once dominated my life in regards to my sexuality, and really created a disconnect between who God created me to be and who I believed myself to be. And it allowed for me to celebrate and accept myself. Every time I'm asked about my tattoo, I can share as much or as little of my story, and I'm not ashamed about any of the symbols that are represented therein. The tattoo itself is simply evidence and an artifact of the personal changes that occurred in the areas of emotional, psychological, and behavioral health in my faith deconstruction and reconstruction, and my full acceptance of myself as a bisexual child of God.
Hi, I'm Martha Warner, and this is my story, Traumatized by Love, a story of continuing bonds. This is the story of how I ended up with this koi fish on my spine. So I settled into life with an addict pretty early on. He really just he was consumed by power over others, and especially over me. I was 18 years old, and even though he was rarely physically abusive, he did leave occasional bruises from shoving and pulling and yanking on my arm. He was incredibly mentally and verbally abusive. He just reiterated daily how worthless I was. He was also socially and emotionally abusive. He was scaring off my friends and family until I was virtually alone. He stripped every speck of my self-confidence, my bravado. He left me weak, meek, and even tired. And then I met Rick. Rick was kind. He was passionate about living. He especially was passionate about living life with me. He was affectionate. He was full of life. Besides the eventual ache he left. He loved me wholeheartedly and reiterated daily how amazing I was. He really struggled, though, to fight his own demons, and eventually he took his own life and left me alone. He stole away the person who helped me heal and left me broken and tired. The symbol of a koi fish, it represents strength and perseverance. I chose the colors purple, which indicate power, and blues, which indicate inspiration, for a reason. The blues represent the inspiration that Rick brought to me. I also have it placed on my spine, which is a painful reminder of every bit of love that I had for him. Klaas Silverman and Nickman created this piece about continuing bonds in 1996. Essentially, it says that relationships with deceased, they change. When we lose someone, our relationship, because we don't see them day to day, because we don't have them around in our lives, they change, but they never really end. And by creating the tattoo that now sits happily on my spine, I've created a connection to Rick, a person that I loved with my whole heart. Thank you so much.
The future unearthing of our stories. So what happens next? We intend on coding each of the other stories from our other participants, colleagues, co-authors, using in vivo and then narrative coding with plot coding to understand the action of each story and what is going on. as I said earlier in previous slides, with the smaller stories of each grander story. And then we're going to analyze each of the other stories as a smaller story within the overall context of each woman's lived experience, and analyze each story simultaneously using intersectional analysis and drawing upon what identities have emerged through the storytelling. And then lastly, doing cross-case analysis of the stories with one another and the tattoos with one another. And that's where we are at so far. So this is an in progress, continuing both study and writing. We're doing it simultaneously. And that is our presentation. We hope that you have been able to enjoy it and have learned a lot from it. If you would like to contact us, we invite you to do so. We can be found at Indiana University, Kokomo. Each of our pieces of information are here. Again, my name is Dr. Christina Romero Ivanova. Email civanova@iuk.edu, Professor Brooke Komar, B.D. Green at iuk.edu, and Professor Martha Werner, MBU GHER at iu.edu. And thank you for listening to our presentation.